let's begin with our session on international news. Without wasting any more time, let's begin with the third marathon session on international news. Okay, so we begin our news, of course, with one of the most important things which have happened in this last 1 year, which is essentially the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So let's understand what this conflict was all about, what has been the impact of the conflict for India as well as for the other world, and for example, even Russia. Okay, so on February 24th, Russia had launched a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. This is what they called a special military intervention. The word that was used by Putin was special military intervention. Now, before I go into what exactly happened, let's understand the background of the news, because as you all know, in CLAT, all of that can be expected. So post the disintegration, okay, the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine as an independent country came into being, and it came into being in the year 1991. Okay, before that, of course, Ukraine was member of the Soviet Union, and since then, of course, Ukraine is what we call, has always been a buffer state between European Union and Russia. So this concept of buffer state eventually came in during the Cold War times, when every country wanted their enemy to be a little away from them. Okay, they did not want their enemies on their borders. So to do that, what they would do is that on the borders itself, they would identify countries which would act as buffer states, countries which would not take any position. They would not be on anybody's side. Okay, so this would ensure that both the sides are away from each other and are not in direct confrontation. Okay, so Ukraine for a very long time, since 1991, has been a kind of a buffer state between NATO and Russia. Okay, now a lot of things have changed subsequently. The expansion of NATO towards the expansion of NATO eastwards towards the former Soviet countries like Estonia or Poland or other countries, that triggered a lot of anxiety for the Russians. Okay, so that was a huge issue, and that led to a lot of things. The most important being in 2014. In 2014, a separatist insurgency started in Ukraine's eastern region. So if you look at the map, which you can see on the screen, you will see the areas of Luhansk, Donetsk. All of these areas are the eastern part of Ukraine. Okay, a separatist insurgency backed by Russian forces, it started, and it took away a lot of the eastern region in these two newly formed republics of Luhansk and Donetsk. Okay, including the most important part, which is the Crimea Peninsula. So if you see on the south in the Black Sea, Crimea Peninsula was also taken away in 2014. And since then, there have been skirmishes and fights between the Ukrainian forces and the separatists. And then what happened on 24th of February 2022 was that Russian forces officially, earlier they were named as separatists, but after February, officially the Russian forces invaded Ukraine and took a lot of part of the eastern Ukraine. And before that happened, they declared two areas of eastern Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk, as separate republics. Now, you might be thinking, sir, what might be the reason? Again, the same concept of buffer state. So if on the east side, if Ukraine has decided that I want to go some other way, I want to be part of European Union, I want to be part of NATO, eventually what will happen because of it? That concept of buffer state is suddenly gone. Okay, so the countries would want that that there is a buffer state. So they created these two republics again between Russia and Ukraine. Okay, so that was behind it. But again, as I said, a lot of reasons might have gone into it. Okay, So as I was saying, so all of these were basically reasons behind what was happening in Ukraine, okay, and what happened in Ukraine post February. Now let's go into essentially Russian annexation, and also why Russia went into Ukraine, apart from the reasons that I've already mentioned. Okay, uh, so Ukraine not joining the Eurasian Economic Community and its growing closeness to EU, which is the European Union, of course, was one reason. So Eurasian Economic Community was a kind of a venture that was brought forward by Russia, especially, and it included Russia and some European countries, especially on the east side. Okay, Ukraine was reluctant and decided not to join the Eurasian Economic Community because they wanted to join the European Economic Community. Okay, so that was, of course, one reason. The other reason was, of course, the NATO expansionism. Now, what do I mean by NATO expansionism? So, in the 1990s, okay, when more or less when Soviet Union had disintegrated, the idea essentially was that that there was a kind of informal deal between the Russians and the Europeans that NATO won't move eastwards towards the Russian border, that it won't move eastwards. But unfortunately, what happened was that due to NATO expansionism and the open door policy, as it is called, that many other countries on the eastern part, like Estonia or Poland or Romania or Slovenia, all of these countries were included as part of NATO. Okay, so that of course gave a lot of anxiety, as I said, to the Russians. Okay, so NATO expansionism, of course, was one important reason. Third is the political changes in Ukraine. So essentially, who is the current president of Ukraine? Any idea who's the current president of Ukraine? It is Vladimir Zelensky, right? Now, Vladimir Zelensky essentially is a Jew, okay? Not somebody who has been very close to the Russians, okay? In fact, his idea of growing Ukraine was being part of European community and eventually become part of NATO. So political changes in Ukraine post 2019, when Zelensky won the election, that also created a lot of turmoil in terms of the political relations between Russia and Ukraine. Okay, so that also was one of the reasons why Russians eventually decided to militarily intervene. Okay, so that was another reason. So these were major reasons. Now, after Russians eventually invaded, what has been the world reaction? So US has essentially said that just because you are threatening us, that we are not going to close the doors to other countries for NATO. Okay, so that of course is something very important. So NATO and subsequently, you know what happened, right? Which two countries have applied for NATO now? Which two countries have applied for NATO? Very good. It is Sweden and Finland, right? So Sweden and Finland have now, and these two countries were essentially considered neutral countries, okay? Or countries who were, even if they were not neutral, that they did not take sides per se, okay? Suddenly, because of this invasion, now they have gone towards NATO, okay? So these things have happened, and this happened because, of course, NATO has an open door policy. NATO would continue to induct members if they wish to apply for NATO. Okay. US is currently supplying training, weapons, and other assistance, and the assistance as of now has exceeded $50 billion. Germany has suspended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So this is again something very important. A direct question can come. So I will talk about Nord Stream 2 in detail later on. Russia has become the highest sanctioned country in the world. Okay, no other country has more sanctions, especially economic sanctions, than Russia, and they include crude oil, gas, disintegration from essentially SWIFT system, which you all know. So all of that has been the result of this invasion, right? You can also see the maps as to how the invasion took place, from which places the Russians moved into eastern Ukraine. So all of that is reflected in the map. What has been India's position? So India has maintained neutrality. Of course, India doesn't take sides. In fact, we were the founders of what kind of alliance or what kind of movement? Can anybody tell me? Very good. The non-aligned movement. Okay. So if I have to ask you a question, no, on India's neutrality on Russia, Ukraine, I can actually ask you something about even NAM, non-aligned movement. Okay. Because that is where it started, right? So read about that also. Okay. So India's stand and position has been neutral, and in the number of resolutions, because we are also part of Security Council right now, we have always stated that we want a peaceful resolution through sustained diplomatic efforts. Okay, so diplomatically put, but that is something that we have always advocated. Okay, what has been the impact on India? We have been suffering from high inflation due to the increase in crude oil prices and also the increase in other commodities. Okay, now one thing that I want to add here before I go to Nord Stream is that Russia and Ukraine both are one of the largest producer of grains in the world. Okay. Now, because of the war, there has been a grain shortage. To a certain extent, that grain shortage, India thought that it could take care of it. Okay. And India started exporting grains to other parts of the world, especially Middle East, Egypt, and other countries which were dependent on Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, that led to increase in prices of wheat, sugar, and other commodities in India. Okay, because what started happening was that farmers and merchants and middlemen, they started hoarding wheat and other commodities. Okay, because they thought that they would get more prices later on, higher prices, right? Which led to the ban on the export of wheat. Okay, which is very important for all of you to know. So that happened. A blanket ban has been put. Secondly, we have also limited the export of sugar. So we are only going to export 1 million ton worth of sugar. That's the only quota that we have put. Other than that, we won't be exporting sugar also. So that is again something very important. Direct result of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Defense purchases, of course, will be affected in many ways, because we not only buy equipments from Russia, but we also buy equipments from Ukraine. So many of the tank engines that we have, they actually come from Ukraine. Many of the engines that we have for our ships, they actually come from Ukraine. Okay, so that will be an impact that we'll face in the long term. But please go into it. One more thing that I want to tell you, although it's not part of international affairs, is that this ban on wheat is directly related to the withdrawal of the farm laws. Now, can anybody tell me what is the relation? What is the relation between withdrawal of farm laws and the ban on wheat, export of wheat? Nobody. How many of you know about a law called Essential Commodities Act? Raise their hands. How many of you have heard of Essential Commodities Act? So essentially, when the farm laws were introduced, so out of the 3 laws, one was an amendment to the Essential Commodities Act. Okay. Now, what happened was that government gave away its control on banning exports. Okay, in the new law that was passed. Now, that actually meant that government could not ban, okay, all of these commodities or all of these grains, export of all of these grains, except in exceptional circumstances. Okay. Now, what happened due to the withdrawal of the law was now that the government had free rein, that they could ban anything they wanted. if they believed, even not in exceptional circumstances, if they believed that the inflation is going up or some reason, they could ban it, which is detrimental to farmers. But government could do it because the farmers did not allow the new amendments to get through. Okay, so that is the relation that I want you to understand. I also want you to go into Essential Commodities Act and see what the law is all about. Okay, let's go to Nord Stream pipeline. So as you can see on the map, right, this is a pipeline which essentially bypasses entire Europe. From Russia directly connects Germany. Okay. Now, Nord Stream is the longest subsea pipeline. It's an export pipeline meant to supply gas to Europe. There were two pipelines which were part of it. Okay. One was the Nord Stream 1, which is operational since 2011, which starts from Leningrad to Germany. Okay. The second one, which was a bigger one, around, you could transport 55 billion cubic meters of gas per year. This is the pipeline which eventually was banned. Okay, it has been suspended, and that has been a big reason. Okay, so yes, I think we will resume from Nord Stream. So as I was saying, essentially there were two pipelines which were part of the Nord Stream project. The first one is already operational. Russians are already selling gas to entire Europe through Germany. The second one, Nord Stream 2 pipeline, has been suspended due to the invasion. So don't get confused, because generally we tend to use Nord Stream. So there are two different pipelines under operation. Okay. So please keep this in mind. This was essentially a summary of what's happening with respect to the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the related aspects of it. I hope you have understood it well. Let's go on to some other important news. Global Plastics Treaty. So this is something, again, very, very important. Okay. So essentially what had happened in March was that the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNEA, they have voted to formulate an internationally legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. Now, this is something very, very significant. Okay. The reason being that generally these initiatives are taken at a state level, right? But this is an initiative directly taken by the agencies of United Nations. So it is significant that in the near future that we can have global plastics treaty. Okay. Now the UNEA resolution to end plastic pollution, this will establish an intergovernmental negotiating committee. Okay, which will negotiate the terms, the provisions of this treaty, and they will see what kind of plastic is to be banned, what sort of plastic is not to be banned, what can be allowed, what will be the liability of states. All of these things would be looked into as part of the Global Plastics Treaty. The instrument is expected to be legally binding in nature. This is something very important, and would contain alternatives to the full life cycle of plastics, as well as the design of reusable and recyclable products and materials, and the need for improved international collaboration for scientific and technical cooperation among the member states of the UN. Now, this happened at the 50th anniversary of UNEP, which is the United Nations Environmental Program. The meeting took place in Nairobi, Kenya. Okay, so please remember this. I want all of you to go into Global Plastics Treaty. If they give you a paragraph and a few questions, you should be able to answer. Okay. Okay, let's go back to our neighborhood. As there is a saying, right, that what happens in Pakistan is the internal affairs of India, right? So we should know about what was happening with respect to the Pakistani political crisis. What had happened essentially was that Imran Khan government at that point of time lost the majority in the parliament. They required 172 votes out of 342 the no confidence motion was supported by 174 members. So the government fell. But before it fell, there was a lot of drama. The matter went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, you do the no confidence motion on the parliament floor. Then it happened, and then Imran Khan resigned. So who is the new Prime Minister of Pakistan? The new Prime Minister of Pakistan is Shehbaz Sharif, who is the brother of a former Prime Minister of Pakistan. His name is what? Nawaz Sharif. Very good. So Nawaz Sharif exactly is the correct answer, and his brother Shehbaz Sharif is now the Prime Minister. Quite possible in a few days' time that again there will be fresh elections and Shehbaz Sharif will no longer be the Prime Minister. Okay, so that can also happen, but let's see. Okay, so all you need to do is just remember the name of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Also, you should know, or if you can tell me, what is the name of the party that Shehbaz Sharif and Imran Khan belong to? What is the name of the political party? Let's see how many of you know this. PTI? Correct. Imran Khan's party is called PTI. Very good. So this is something that when you go through this topic, I want you to remember both the parties, okay? Because Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, PTI, okay? Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz is the party which Shehbaz Sharif belongs to, okay? PMLN, you will see, okay? So a coalition of opposition parties have come up, and the highest seats PMLN had. So the Prime Minister is from PMLN. Okay. Also, if you want to know who is the Foreign Minister and all, you can look into that also, because the Foreign Minister of Pakistan is a peculiar fellow. Okay. Are you aware of who is the Foreign Minister? Son of a former Prime Minister of Pakistan. Any idea? Okay, look into it. Okay, this is your task. Let's go ahead. Let's see other things that have happened across the world. Again, very close to our country, a country with which we have had really good historical relations. Let's go into the unrest in Kazakhstan, because you won't find a lot of news coming out of this part of the world. But this is something very, very important, simply being that you won't find unrest in this part of the world. And second, there are generally no interventions from foreign powers. Okay. In this case, there was an intervention. So I thought that you should know about this. Okay. So there was a sudden spike in fuel prices in Kazakhstan, which triggered, it was not the only reason, but it triggered a national crisis in Kazakhstan and led to mass protests in Kazakhstan against the ruling government. Okay. What happened because of this was, of course, was that foreign powers, as I was mentioning earlier, they intervened in Kazakhstan. Okay. So the protests, they began in a very old city of Kazakhstan. It's called Zanauhin. That is where it began. Many people died, in fact. Then subsequently, the protest reached the capital and many other places in Kazakhstan. Again, many deaths took place there. And later on, the Russian-led forces, they arrived in Kazakhstan. Okay, because Kazakhstan and the other Central Asian countries, along with Russia, are part of an organization called CSTO. Okay, it is called the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Okay, it is very similar to NATO. NATO is for Europe, what CSTO is for Central part of the world. Okay, Central Asia, in fact. Okay. Uh, so essentially, remember about this particular organization. You should know who is the president of Kazakhstan, what is the capital of Kazakhstan, because all of these things are related directly to the protests. Okay, because earlier, no, before the current president, there was a person who was kind of a dictator in Kazakhstan. In his name, the entire capital city is named. Okay, so that is the reason why I'm telling you that you should know the earlier president, the current president, the name of the city, all of that. By any chance, is anybody aware? Very good. Gursimar is absolutely correct. Uh, Nur Sultan Nazarbayev. Okay, this is the full name. The city is essentially called Nur Sultan also. It's named after the earlier dictatorial president of Kazakhstan. As I said, you should know about CSTO and the current president when it comes to this. Okay. Also see where Kazakhstan is located. One of the largest countries in Central Asia, surrounded by Russia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, China, and of course the Europe on the other side. Okay, it's not Netanyahu. Okay, from Central Asia, we will go to Africa, because a lot of things happen in Africa which you may know, which you may not know. So I will try to cover at least a few important things which have happened, which are new, because some things happened in 2020, 21, and they're still continuing. So I'm not going into those things. Okay, like for example, the crisis in Ethiopia, right? The crisis in Ethiopia is still going on, but it started long back in 2019-20. So I'm not going into that, but you can check it out. Okay, so let's, as Palak has correctly stated, we are going to go into coups. Okay, so the coups which have happened in Africa, we will go into that, and of course other things. Violence in South Africa, this is something important, especially from Indian perspective, because many of these violent attacks were racial in nature. Many Indians and Indian establishments were particularly chosen, and they were attacked in South Africa. Okay. Now, what exactly happened in South Africa was that the former president of South Africa, his name is Jacob Zuma. Okay. He was sentenced to 15 months in prison for contempt of court. So there were some corruption charges on Zuma. He was asked to be present in front of the judges and in front of the court. He did not do it. So he got a 15-month prison sentence. Okay. After that, there were riots, there were protesting crowds, especially in the Gauteng and the Zulu Natal province, okay, which was the home to Jacob Zuma. Protests, apart from this fact that he got imprisonment, were also centered around increasing poverty levels and record levels of unemployment in South Africa. Riots also turned into racist attacks against white people and members of the Indian community, because a lot of members of the Indian community live permanently in South Africa. So a lot of these violent attacks also took place against Indian community. Now, the reason behind it was a brother duo. Okay, is anybody aware of this brother duo that I'm talking about? Anybody who's aware what was happening in South Africa? So this brother duo is called the Gupta brothers. Okay. Now the Gupta brothers, they are no, Ali Asgar, not Rajapakshas. Yeah, Rajapaksa is in South Sri Lanka. Okay. Gupta brothers. Okay. So Gupta brothers essentially are billionaires in South Africa, but they were involved in the corruption scandal in which Jacob Zuma was also involved. In fact, the allegations are that they were the ones who gave the money, and they wanted some things to be done. Okay, they influenced the government and made appointments and all of that. Okay, so because of that, certain violent protests were also centered around Indian communities. So remember about this. You should know who's the current president of South Africa, and also if you want to read more into it, you can read more into it. Also remember the name of Jacob Zuma. Okay. Yemeni crisis and ceasefire. Now, this is something very, very important, because of the Russia-Ukraine war and other things that are happening all around the world, somehow this crisis doesn't come into news that much, but this is one of the biggest humanitarian crisis which is going on in the world right now. Yemen is now in the 7th year of its high-level conflict. Around 4 lakh people have been killed through direct and indirect means. Around 20 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, and 4 million people have been displaced in what is called world's worst humanitarian crisis. And somehow we don't even read about it, right? So Yemen now is divided between the Houthi rebels in the north of the country, which includes the Yemeni capital of Sana'a, and the internationally recognized government, which controls much of the south and the east of Yemen. Okay. Now, this war, which is happening against the Houthis. The Houthi is a tribe. These are essentially rebels, which rebelled against the recognized government in Yemen. The government in Yemen is supported by some external powers, especially the Middle Eastern powers like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others. So many of the attacks that you might have heard about have happened in Saudi Arabia and UAE by the Houthis. Okay. So if the question comes, which essentially tribal or rebels are attacking Saudi Arabia or UAE or have captured the north part of the territory of Yemen, you should answer Houthis. Okay. Also go into who is the current Prime Minister, President of Yemen. You have to remember that also. Now, why is it important? Recently, because a 2-month ceasefire was agreed in April 2022. This is the first time a ceasefire has been agreed to in the last 6 years. So 7 years the war is going on. 6 years mein pehli baar ceasefire has happened in Yemen. Please go into this, read a little bit more. And of course, if you find something relevant, remember it. Also, Devanshi is correct. Were they the tribe which conspired the drone attack which killed Indians in UAE? You are absolutely correct. Houthis are the ones responsible for all these drone attacks as well as the missile attacks which took place in UAE, unfortunately in which Indians also died. Okay, so you are correct. Another coup which happened in another part of Africa was in the country of Mali. Now, this is again something which you would have read about. I'm not going into too much of detail because I know that not everything is relevant. Okay. So Mali has become an epicenter for regional conflict. There has been a lot of instability in that entire region. 2 coups have happened in Mali in the span of 9 months. Okay. And in both the coups, the person who was responsible was Colonel Assimi Goïta. Okay. He has replaced Anne Daw as the transition president, or as it is called in Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta. Okay. So remember his name. You can remember the president who was removed. This was considered a little bit stable compared to other countries which surround Mali. But unfortunately, even in this country, 2 coups have happened in the last 9 months, because of which Mali has in fact been removed, or some sanctions have been put on Mali by African countries and also by the US. Okay. Sudanese crisis. So this is again something which is happening for some time. Sudan's civilian Prime Minister, Abdullah Hamdok, he was somehow considered a person who would take Sudan forward, but unfortunately, he has resigned now. He was sacked by the military rulers in Sudan and was reinstated for some time, but then again he resigned because they were not allowing him to function. This essentially happened when General Omar al-Bashir was indicted for genocide and was toppled by a popular revolution which happened in April 2019. So before Abdullah Hamdok, General Omar al-Bashir was ruling Sudan. He was indicted for a genocide, which is again something very important. He was toppled by a popular revolution in Sudan, and subsequently Abdullah Hamdok came into power. 11-member body comprising of military and civilian members was essentially created, and Abdullah Hamdok was the head of that. Sudan entered into a peace deal with rebel groups, banned female genital mutilation, made peace with Israel, and of course reached out to international powers for economic assistance. This has happened after 2019, when this Sovereignty Council was created in Sudan. So a lot of good things were done, but unfortunately, again, Abdullah Hamdok has been sacked. Quite possible that Sudan can again will go into turmoil and conflict. Okay, remember where all of these countries are located. Okay, look at the position of Sudan. Look at the position of Guinea. This is essentially the western part of Africa, West Africa. Okay, right? Look at Mali, again west part of Africa. South Africa, as you know, southern part of Africa. Yemen is essentially on the eastern side. If you look at the entire Middle East, so it's on that side. Okay. So from Africa, we are going to Caribbean islands. Okay. Barbados has become the world's newest republic. Barbados has officially removed Queen Elizabeth II as the head of the state and has become the newest republic in nearly 400 years after the country became a British colony. It has been 55 years since Barbados got independence, but since then they had considered Queen Elizabeth II as the monarch, and this has been a change, and a new president has been appointed. So your task, of course, is to know who's the president of Barbados, the newly appointed president of Barbados. So as I said, they will still remain part of the Commonwealth as India is, and Dikshita is correct, Palak is correct, Sandra Mason. Okay, please remember her name, new president of Barbados. Okay. I will go back to the last country that I wanted to cover, unfortunately, after Sudan. And that country is again located in West Africa, which is Guinea. Now, this is a country which I would say is a country which was quite a developing country in Africa. Okay. Now, a coup was perpetrated again. The president of Guinea, Alpha Conde, was removed from power. Again, something very important and relevant that you should all remember. The president was less than 1 year into his third term. After he amended the constitution in Guinea, a lot of problems happened after that amendment also, but he has been now removed. So Guinea was the first French colony in sub-Saharan Africa to declare its independence in 1958 from France, of course. The leader of the 5th September coup is Mamadi Doumbouya. Okay, this is the guy who is a military person in Guinea. He is the one, he's a general. In fact, he is the one responsible for this coup in Guinea. Remember this country also. Okay. Other than that, you need not remember anything. The capital of Guinea is Conakry. Okay. So Barbados we have already discussed. I will go into the Korean War. Okay. Now, something important did happen with respect to Korean War, although Korean War is not new. Korean War, in fact, started in the 1950s. The war began with an incursion across the 38th parallel. So this is one line that I want you to remember. This separates North and South Korea. It's called 38th parallel. Okay. So there was an invasion by the North Koreans, supported by the communists in Russia and China. They attacked the South Koreans. American troops were rushed into South Korea and they joined the South in the war, and subsequently a full-fledged war broke out with North Korea, China, and USSR on one side, and of course the Americans supported by other allies and the South Koreans. North Koreans were pushed back to a certain extent, and a bloody stalemate ensued. Okay. Now, what happened after that was, generally when such things happen, a treaty is signed to end the war. But till today, that treaty has not been signed. So officially, Korean War has not ended. An armistice was signed between US and North Korea in 1953 to kind of a ceasefire, but the Korean War, which started in 1950, has not officially ended yet. Okay, but now North and South Korea, along with the help of US and China, have agreed in principle to declare a formal end to the Korean War. So look into Korean War if you wish to read a little bit about it. But this is only relevant for you because finally they have decided to put an end to this bloody war, one of the first wars uh, after the World War II. Okay, so read a little bit into it, although the most important things I've already mentioned. Okay. Global minimum tax deal. So this is again something very, very important. I want all of you to go a little deeper into it because this is one thing which I feel can come in the exam. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has announced that a global deal to ensure big companies pay a global minimum tax. So please remember GMT, global minimum tax rate of 15% has been agreed by 136 countries, including India. Okay. The countries behind the accord together account for 90% of the global economy. GMT is tailored to address the low effective rate of tax shelled out by some of the world's biggest corporations, including big tech companies like Apple, Alphabet, and Facebook. So these companies, they set up their companies or shell companies in countries which have very less tax. Okay. Or for example, if India is taxing you at 15% and Pakistan is taxing you at 5%, that you would want to go to Pakistan, right? Although there are many other reasons why I wouldn't want to go to Pakistan. But if the tax rate is less, I would go there, right? So to stop this movement of companies from one jurisdiction to another, 136 countries have agreed that they will set up a minimum tax, okay, which is of 15%. If you want to keep more, you can keep more, but this will be the minimum threshold, okay? So there is a proposed two-pillar solution. The global minimum tax rate would apply to overseas profits of multinational firms with $868 million in sales globally. Okay, so this is the threshold. Okay. What is the pillar one? Minimum tax and subject to tax rules. Government could still set whatever local corporate tax they want, but if companies pay lower tax or lower rates in a particular country, their whole government could top up their taxes to the minimum of 15%, eliminating the advantage of shifting profits. Okay, so essentially, if a government is charging you less, and if you're shifting there, then if you are part of this accord, then you will have to bring it to the minimum 15%. Okay. Pillar two, reallocation of additional shares of profit to the market jurisdiction. It allows countries where revenues allows countries where revenues are earned to tax 25% of the largest multinationals' so-called excess profits, defined as profits in excess of 10% of revenue. Okay, so this kind of additional share of profit can also be imposed, and the governments can ask for it under this particular treaty. Okay, so please keep this particular treaty in mind. This is something very, very important, and I want all of you to go into this. Okay, global minimum tax deal. Okay, and especially because India is part of it. Kenya, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka have abstained from it as of now. Okay, so it is essentially 868 million. Okay. So after the GMT, let's go into FATF. More or less, you know about FATF. FATF has retained Pakistan on its grey list or increased monitoring list. Okay, if the countries do not satisfy the set criteria, those countries can be put into the black list or the grey list. Of course, Pakistan as of now is in the grey list. There are 17 countries which are part of the grey list of FATF, which is Financial Action Task Force. After the latest meeting, Zimbabwe has been excluded from the list after a review found that they were compliant on all the parameters set forth by FATF. Okay. Now you can Google the 17 countries. Okay. of course, do not remember all the 17 countries, but a lot of them, okay, are there. What is the Financial Action Task Force? This is something relevant. Just remember it, okay? This is an intergovernmental body that was established in 1989, headquartered in Paris. The objective is essentially to set standards and promote effective implementation of legal, regulatory, and operational measures for combating money laundering. So that is one objective, to tackle money laundering. Terror financing, again something important, and other related threats to the integrity of international financial system. Its secretariat, as I said, is located in Paris. FATF currently has 39 members. Okay, just remember this much. If a question comes on FATF, you should be able to answer. Okay. From FATF, we go to AUKAS. Now, many of you know what AUKAS is all about. The picture that you see, the second picture that you see, according to me, defines AUKAS completely. Okay. So the picture in the middle shows 3 countries. The 3 countries are Britain, US, and Australia, right? They have come up with an alliance. It's a new trilateral security partnership. The aim of this is that these 2 countries, UK and US, will supply nuclear submarines to Australia. Okay, so that is something which is very, very important. Now, the countries that you see around the 3 countries in middle, no, they are unhappy with it. So on the right hand side, you can see China, Malaysia, and others who are not very happy. Malaysia is kind of relieved. Japan is happy, but China is, of course, not so happy, right? Because more or less, essentially, it is aimed at China, right? But if you see on the left hand side, again, European Union and France also is not happy, because when AUKUS was created, Australia decided to withdraw from a huge $50 billion submarine contract which was given to France. Okay, so France, of course, was angry with this alliance. Now, firstly, you should know what this alliance, the full form is. It basically stands for Australia, UK, and US. Okay, so there is no full form per se. Why it has been done? To supply nuclear submarine and related technology to Australia. Key points: the focus is on Indo-Pacific, transfer of nuclear submarine tech, and of course, multi-sectoral cooperation in other sectors. One more thing that I thought is relevant to this is the Five Eyes Alliance. Now, it's an intelligence sharing arrangement between 5 English-speaking democracies, which is US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, this is one of the most sophisticated intelligence sharing arrangement in the world. In fact, you know that Ukrainians are winning in the war. Okay, they are able to pinpoint on Russian forces, especially a lot of Russian generals have been killed in this particular war. In fact, more generals have been killed till now than in the last 50, 60 years. Okay, so why is that happening? Because of the precise intelligence which is being provided by the Five Eyes Alliance to Ukraine. Okay, so they are working round the clock for Ukraine currently, especially. And as I said, it's world's most successful intelligence alliance. So remember that. Okay. From AUKUS, I go to India's presidency of UNSC. So last year, in August, India was the president of UNSC, which is the United Nations Security Council. Okay. Now, why is it relevant? Because while we were the president, at that point of time, huge crisis and the takeover of Afghanistan was taking place in Afghanistan by Taliban. Okay. So, of course, under India's presidency, UN adopted resolutions pertaining to Afghan issue. First one after the takeover of Kabul by Taliban. Other resolutions involved maritime security and counter-terrorism. India began its presidency with high-level signature event on maritime security presided over by the Prime Minister. This was the first time the Prime Minister of India chaired the Security Council. Okay. So again, something significant. If something happens for the first time, we have to remember it. Okay. So please remember India's presidency of the UNSC. Also, who is currently India's permanent representative to UN? What's his name? Very good. T.S. Tirumurti. Remember his name. Okay. Who is the Foreign Minister of India? Dr. S. Jaishankar, right? From India's UN presidency, as I said, one of the important issues that India had to deal with when India was the president of UNSC was the Afghan takeover. Okay. So essentially, the entire country was taken over with the exception of a very small area controlled by the forces of Ahmad Shah Massoud. Why did the Afghan army fail so soon? Not effective without supplies from the US, because US forces had withdrawn. Air support, ground support was not there. There was, of course, corruption and lack of local legitimacy, and there was no moral support given to the army in Afghanistan. I want all of you to know a little bit about who is currently essentially ruling Afghanistan. Okay. So who are the major players? I want you to know their names. So by chance, if they ask you something that who's the prime minister, who's the foreign minister, or something of that sort, you should be able to answer that. Okay. So please look into those important things as part of the Afghanistan takeover. Okay. Akhundzada is there. You have the brothers, right? And the Haqqanis, right? All of these people are there. Just remember their names, okay? Should be enough. Abdul Ghani Baradar, very good. He featured in Time Hundreds list of 2021. Again, so all of these things, no, that's why I was telling you that there are a lot of interrelated things which when you read, you will figure them out, okay? So read them. A little bit about history of the Afghan conflict. So essentially what had happened in Afghanistan, and many of you may not be aware of this, so I'll quickly take you through this. So the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Okay. Mujahideen fighters with support of the US and Pakistan fought the Soviet forces, because of which the Soviets had to withdraw from Afghanistan in 1989, and the government which was installed by the Russians in Kabul, that collapsed. Subsequently, from 1989 onwards, a civil war erupted in Afghanistan, which led to the formation of Taliban. Now, Taliban was founded in 1994 by a person called Mullah Muhammad Umar. He was a local imam in one of the biggest cities of Afghanistan, Kandahar. Okay, so these Talibans, the Taliban fighters and all, they were not very fond of the Mujahideen fighters, like for example the Ahmad Shah Massoud and other fighters, and they tried their best to remove as much as these fighters from the government. Okay, in 1999, Talibanis proclaimed an emirat, which is the Emirat of Afghanistan, and proclaimed Sharia law in Afghanistan, which led to a lot of violence. Women rights were completely taken away, and a lot of things which are part of Sharia law, right? Then subsequently what happened was that US was attacked in 2001. And which attacks I'm talking about, the attacks on Twin Towers as well as the other military establishments in US. 3,000 people were killed. And to find Al-Qaeda, and because Al-Qaeda had refuge in Afghanistan, Afghanistan was again in turmoil. US requested the Taliban to give essentially Osama bin Laden and to remove Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. That did not happen, and that led to the invasion of Afghanistan by America and other allied forces. So this is the entire recent Afghan history in a nutshell. Okay. So these, according to me, were some of the important things which happened in terms of international news. I think it covers most of the important things, as I said. Okay. But in terms of international news, this is it. Okay. We have covered most of the international news. Chalo. So we are done for today. I hope whatever we discussed was of some help to all of you. Did it help you? Did you find it interesting? Please tell me in the chat section so that we keep on doing these sessions for all of you. Right? So keep in mind that these sessions will go on. Please attend them regularly. These are the upcoming exams. I hope you know all the dates, right? And also, these are the upcoming sessions apart from the GK sessions that we are doing for all of you. So please attend these sessions also regularly. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care of yourself. Good night. And we'll meet again tomorrow for the other session. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.